The real answer is that nobody knows for sure. And that's the honest truth. The question of why two men were found dead on a hill in Brazil wearing strange lead masks is one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Yeah, we have clues, we have theories, but we don't have an answer. The story is a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. It all started on August 20th, 1966. A young man, a teenager named Jorge da Costa Alves, was flying a kite on a place called Vintém Hill near Niterói in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He was searching for his kite when he found something he never expected. He saw two bodies. They were lying in a clearing, partially hidden by the undergrowth. Scared, he ran and told the police. Because of the difficult terrain and the fading light, the police didn't make it to the scene until the next day. When they arrived, what they found was deeply strange. The two men were lying neatly on their backs, side by side. They were dressed in formal suits and waterproof raincoats. There were no obvious signs of violence. No blood, no bullet wounds, no signs of a struggle. The ground around them was undisturbed. It looked almost as if they had simply laid down to rest and never gotten up again. But the most bizarre detail was on their faces. Each man wore a crude, homemade mask made of lead. They weren't full face masks, more like visors that covered the eyes. They looked like something you might make in a home workshop. Next to their bodies, the police found a few other items. There was an empty water bottle. There was a small packet containing 2 wet towels, and there was a small notebook. The notebook contained a set of cryptic instructions. The writing was neat and precise. It read 1630 be at the agreed place. 1830 swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals await mask signal. It also had some notes on electronic formulas and a list of things to buy, including the masks and the raincoats. The first step for the police was to identify the men. They were Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana. They were both electronics technicians from a nearby town called Campos dos Goitacazes. They were married men with families. They were known as respectable, hard-working people. They were not criminals, but they did have a strange hobby. They were part of a small group of what could be called scientific spiritualists. They were obsessed with trying to contact beings from other dimensions or other planets. They believed they could use a combination of electronics, spiritualism, and chemistry to achieve this. The initial investigation was a mess. When the bodies were taken for an autopsy, the coroner's office was very busy. The bodies of Manoel and Miguel were left to decompose for several days in the tropical heat. By the time an autopsy was finally performed, their internal organs were too decomposed to conduct any meaningful toxicology tests. This was a critical failure. If they had swallowed poison as the note suggested, the proof was now gone forever. The coroner could only conclude that they had not died from any obvious external trauma. The cause of death was undetermined, so the police were left with a bizarre scene: 2 dead men and a cryptic note. They had to work backwards. They traced the men's last known movements. On August 17th, 3 days before they were found, Manoel and Miguel told their families they were going to Sao Paulo to buy materials for their work. They had a large sum of money with them, equivalent to about $2,000 today. They took a bus, but not to Sao Paulo. They went to Niterói, the city near Vintém Hill. In Niterói, they stopped at a bar. The waitress there remembered them. She said Miguel seemed very nervous and was constantly checking his watch. It was as if he was waiting for something or worried about being late for something. After leaving the bar, they went to a shop and bought the waterproof raincoats they were found wearing. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. What happened between buying the raincoats and them being found dead on that hill? That's where the facts end and the theories begin. The note is the only real clue we have. Let's break it down. 1630 be at the agreed place. That's 4:30 p.m. The agreed place was presumably the spot on Vintém Hill where they were found. 1830 swallow capsules. That's 6:30 p.m. What were these capsules? Were they poison? Were they some kind of drug? Were they something else entirely? We don't know. After effect. This suggests they expected something to happen after taking the capsules. A physical or mental state. Protect metals. This is one of the most confusing parts. What metals needed protecting? Were they protecting their bodies from something? Or were they protecting some other metal objects? Await mask signal. This is the strangest part of all. What was the signal? Was it a sound? A light? Something they expected to see or hear? And why did they need the lead masks? The theories that have grown around this case are as strange as the facts themselves. They range from the mundane to the truly out there. The most famous theory, and the one that made the case a legend, is the UFO theory. For Brazil, in the 1960s, was a hotspot for UFO sightings and paranormal beliefs. Manoel and Miguel were deep into this world. Their friends and family confirmed that they were trying to build some kind of device to communicate with extraterrestrials. They believed that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. According to this theory, the two men went to Vintém Hill for a prearranged meeting with aliens. The capsules might have been something they were told to take to prepare their bodies for the encounter. The lead masks were to protect their eyes from the intense light or radiation of a UFO. Lead is known to block radiation. After all, the mask signal would be the arrival of the craft. In this scenario, something went terribly wrong. Perhaps the encounter was too intense for their bodies to handle. Or maybe the capsules were a trick, a poison given to them by beings who did not have their best interests at heart. Or maybe the aliens never showed up and the capsules they took were a lethal concoction they made themselves, based on faulty instructions. This theory is fueled by some circumstantial evidence. Several people living near Vintém Hill reported seeing a bright, oval-shaped object hovering over the hill on the night the men are thought to have died. The object was described as glowing and orange-colored. Was this the signal they're waiting for? Was this the cause of their death? It's a compelling story, but it relies on belief in things we cannot prove. It turns the men into martyrs of a cosmic quest. Then there is a more grounded criminal theory. This theory suggests the men were not involved in anything paranormal, but were caught up in a dangerous, illegal deal. The large sum of money they were carrying is a key part of this. The meeting on the remote hill, the cryptic note, it all could be code for a criminal transaction. Perhaps they were involved in smuggling. Some have suggested they were dealing in radioactive materials. This could explain the phrase protect metals, and the use of lead masks. Maybe they were supposed to be buying or selling something like uranium or another radioactive substance. They were double-crossed, their partners in the deal took the money and the materials, and forced them to take poison capsules to eliminate them as witnesses. This theory explains the money and the secrecy. It provides a motive greed. It turns the case from a paranormal mystery into a simple, brutal murder. But it has its own problems. There was no sign of a struggle. If they were forced to take poison, you would expect some kind of resistance. Also, why would experienced electronics technicians use such crude, homemade masks for handling radioactive material? And who were these other people? The police investigated this angle, but never found any connection between the men and any criminal or smuggling rings. It remains pure speculation. A third theory sits somewhere in the middle. It combines elements of their spiritual beliefs with a more scientific explanation. This is the theory of an experiment gone wrong. Manoel and Miguel were not meeting aliens, but they were trying to induce a paranormal experience. They were trying to leave their bodies, to astral project, or to enter a higher state of consciousness. In this version of events, they created a ritual. The location on the hill was important. Maybe they believed it had special energy. The instructions in the notebook were for their own experiment. The capsules were likely a powerful psychoactive drug, maybe something they made themselves or bought on the black market. They took the drug hoping to have a spiritual breakthrough. The lead masks could have been part of the sensory deprivation process. By blocking out light, they might have believed it would enhance their inner vision. The unmasked signal could have been an expected hallucination, a sign that the experiment was working. But they were not chemists, they were electronics technicians, they could have easily miscalculated the dose. Or what they thought would be a mind-expanding trip turned into a fatal overdose. The after effect was death. This theory is plausible. It fits with their known interest in personalities. It explains the ritualistic nature of the scene, it also explains the lack of violence. They died by their own hand, accidentally. The main problem with this theory is, again, the lack of a toxicology report. Without knowing what was in their system, we can never know if they took a drug or not. It's a logical guess, but it's still just a guess. There is even a friend of the two men who adds another layer to this. A man named Elcio Gomez claimed that he was also part of their spiritualist group. He said they were conducting dangerous experiments to prove their theories. He talked about a time when they went to a beach and set off an explosion. He said the explosion was supposed to release an intense light that would trigger some kind of contact. After the explosion, he said Miguel and Manoel became convinced they had a mission to fulfill. They were secretive about it. This friend's testimony supports the idea that they were engaged in reckless self-experimentation. They were playing with forces they didn't understand. Finally, there is a much simpler, though less satisfying explanation. Some have suggested that the men were simply struck by lightning. A sudden, powerful electrical discharge could kill two people instantly without leaving many external marks. Vintém Hill is exposed, and thunderstorms are common in the region, but this theory doesn't explain anything else. Why the suits? Why the masks? Why the note? Why the capsules? It feels like an attempt to find a simple, natural explanation for a series of very unnatural-looking facts. It ignores the core weirdness of the case. It's possible, but it feels incredibly unlikely given all the other details. So, where does that leave us? We have two dead men. We have a set of bizarre props, the lead masks, the raincoats, the notebook. We have a cast of potential culprits, from aliens to drug dealers to the men themselves. and we have a series of investigative failures that ensured the truth would likely never be found. The money they were carrying was never recovered. This fact supports the criminal theory. If they died from an accidental overdose or a UFO encounter, where did the money go? Did someone else find the bodies before the police and simply take the cash? It's possible. The hill was not completely isolated. The lead masks themselves remain a central puzzle. They were found to have been cut from a single sheet of lead. The men likely made them themselves. Why lead? It's a strange material to choose. It's heavy and soft. As mentioned, its primary use in this context would be for radiation shielding. This fact continues to point people towards the UFO theory or the radioactive smuggling theory. But perhaps the reason was more symbolic. In some esoteric traditions, lead is associated with Saturn, the planet of structure, limits, and death. Maybe for them, the lead masks had a spiritual meaning that we can't understand. The case of the lead masks has haunted Brazil for decades. It's a story that gets told and retold. It has become a piece of modern folklore. It's a perfect mystery because it offers just enough clues to get you thinking, but not enough to ever find a solution. Every piece of evidence can be interpreted in multiple ways. The note is a guide to a spiritual journey. Or it's a set of instructions for a shady deal. The masks are protection from aliens. Or they are props in a drug-fueled ritual. What seems most likely when you strip away the more sensational elements is that Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana were men who got lost in their own beliefs. They were not scientists, but they wanted to use science to prove the spiritual world was real. They mixed electronics, chemistry, and mysticism into a dangerous cocktail. They went to that hill with a plan. They followed a set of instructions they either received from someone else or wrote for themselves. They swallowed capsules, put on their masks, and waited for a signal. The signal never came. Or, if it did, it wasn't what they expected. The after effect was not enlightenment. It was death. The most probable cause was a powerful, fast-acting poison or a drug overdose. They were not murdered in the traditional sense. They were victims of their own dangerous quest for knowledge, a quest that took them far beyond their expertise and into territory from which they could not return. But even this most plausible explanation leaves so many questions unanswered. What exactly was in the capsules? Where did they get them? What was the mask signal they were expecting to see? What did protect metals mean? And what happened to their money? The failure to preserve their organs for testing means these questions will almost certainly remain unanswered forever. The lead mask's case is a story about the line between belief and delusion. It's a story about the human desire to connect with something larger than ourselves, and the dangers that can come with that desire. Manoel and Miguel were searching for something. They were looking for proof that we are not alone, that there is more to reality than what we can see. They pursued that search with a sincerity that led them to their deaths on a lonely hill. The lead masks they wore have become a symbol of this mystery. They are a blank, expressionless shield hiding a truth we will never see. They represent the ultimate barrier between the known and the unknown. Why were they there? They were there because two men believed they needed them. They were part of a plan, a ritual, a final fatal experiment. The exact reason why they believed it is the secret that died with them on Vintém Hill. And so the story endures, not as a case to be solved, but as a question to be pondered. A dark, strange, and deeply human mystery.